Hey, what's up guys? Hope you all are doing well and having a great day today. My name is Ghostbear Games and welcome to today's video. In this video, we'll be breaking down one of the decks I've been excited to ever since I first saw Wilderness, Sasquatch Stampede. This deck is inspired by, as you can probably guess, Bigfoot, who is the main frontrunner for MetaZoo's latest set, Wilderness. Now, if you've been keeping up with my series where I break down each of the different types in Wilderness and which cards from each one I think has potential, some of these cards might seem familiar as I'll be touching on some of those spells and beasties that were featured in my forest videos. But there are some new ones in here that I haven't covered yet, so stick around just in case. Now, before we get into today's video, I just wanted to say that if you're interested in picking up any of the cards that I cover today, and you'd also like to help support my work at no extra cost, I am sponsored through Channel Fireball. All you have to do is enter my promo code GHOSTBEAR at checkout. Like I said, there's no extra cost to you. I basically just receive a small percentage of that sale. And speaking of Channel Fireball, if you're interested in reading any of the bi-weekly articles I publish through them, going over like card combos, individual card breakdowns, deck techs, all that good stuff, I'll also publish a link to those in the description as well. And if you're interested in keeping up with notifications for whenever I post a new article or a new video here on YouTube, I'll also post a link to my Instagram, which is basically the best place to keep up with all of my MetaZoo content whenever it goes live. Now all that's out of the way, let's get into today's video. There are a multitude of different Sasquatch builds you can create depending on your playstyle. You can create monotype mid-range builds with Forest, control builds with Frost and Earth, to even aggressive dual-type decks like the Forest Dark mashup featuring Napa Rebobs. In this video, we're going to cover my version of the mid-range Forest-type build, featuring a nice blend of other types in the potions and spells category. But if you're interested in me breaking down any of those other Sasquatch decks I mentioned in a future video, feel free to let me know below. Now, before we get into the deck breakdown, I just wanted to note that MetaZoo technically released an unofficial Bigfoot themed deck in Wilderness, disguised as a Paul Bunyan themed deck. In my opinion, it's a nice beginner's Bigfoot build that introduces you to almost all of the new Sasquatch species in Wilderness, including several of the cards I'll be covering today. So it's a pretty good way to pick them up in one bundle and also get a neat Paul Bunyan promo as a bonus. To help you guys out throughout the video, and also to keep me from repeating myself, look for this little Paul symbol on the screen, which indicates that the card I'm covering comes included in the theme deck. As always, we're going to start things off with the Aura and Terra base. In this case, we'll be including 9 Forest Aura, 2 Forest Gods Amber, and 3 Forest Terra. Notice that one of the Forest Terra is actually one of the newest special Terra from Wilderness, Grand National Forest. It grants an additional +10 to the attacks and life points of beasties that cost 4 or more aura. I do want to note that in this deck it will only be applying to a couple beasties, so it's not particularly necessary, and if you're going up against a deck that you know is using lots of beasties at this terrible benefit, you might want to leave it out. But if not, it's still a nice addition to have on the field. Lastly, before we get into the deck breakdown, I just wanted to note the items you want to either bring with you or wear if you choose to play this deck. Black and white clothing, a blade of grass, and a small bonsai tree. Okay, now let's get into the beasties. The first beastie we're going to cover is one I would argue is the most valuable Sasquatch in the entire deck. And no, I'm not talking about Bigfoot. I'm talking about Skunk Ape. This 3 aura, 50 life point beastie is the main front runner and definitely one that you want on your side of the battlefield. For starters, he has a +20 forest boost on his attacks, along with the tribal boost mechanic shared by all the Sasquatch beasties in Wilderness. If you're unfamiliar, tribal boost grants an additional +10 on his attacks and life points for each other Sasquatch on the battlefield, which also includes your opponents, by the way. But the bonuses don't stop there. If you take a look at his fourth wall symbol, if you happen to also be wearing black and white clothing, he also gets an additional +10 on his attacks as well. And if that's not enough, take a look at his power for more of a defensive approach ending in an offensive bite. By activating his power, not only can the targeted beastie not attack any of your Sasquatch army, but it's also inflicted with 1 poison counter. Poison subtracts 10 life points times the number of poison counters on the affected beastie or caster at the end of turn. Oh, and since poison counters aren't removed until the start of the 3rd turn, that single counter can remove 20 life points. I found this especially perfect for targeting lightning beasties like radioactive hornets and phantom car, which normally would be out of range due to their flying and spirit traits, but because Stank Shot is a power, it can target and even potentially kill beasties with those traits. Next is another Sasquatch from Wilderness who may not look like much on the surface, but once you see him perform on the field, you're definitely in for a very nice surprise. I'm talking about Ohio Grassman. Although this little guy doesn't seem like he would be much of a good defender due to his lack of traits and only 40 life points, his power on the other hand definitely suggests otherwise. When fatigued, his power Nest Maker creates a nest token with 20 life points, which prevents all Sasquatch beasties on your side of the field from being targeted by attacks. Now those 20 life points might not seem like much on the surface, but once you manage to crank out like 2 to 3 of these, your opponent will definitely have to use their resources to mow them down if they want to get at your Sasquatch squad. Once you no longer need nest tokens, these guys can then take on an offensive approach due to their attacks having the same Forest Terra boost and Tribal boost combo shared by Skunk Ape. And speaking of Skunk Ape, one of the things that I also love about these little grassmen is that they're also cheap enough to play multiple of them at a time, so they can either boost Skunk Ape's attacks and life points, or each other's in just one turn. It won't be as effective if you're playing the Dark Forest mashup I referred to earlier, where you have Nappa Rebobs, which only cost 1 aura. However, you can still definitely get some crazy damage built up for a low cost. Our next beastie is a Sasquatch from Nightfall, Wood Devil. Normally this beastie would cost 2 neutral and 3 forest aura to contract, but if there's a real tree within eyesight, it only costs 2 neutral aura to contract him. He has 75 life points, which is incredible if you're able to cast him for that reduced cost. For traits, he has Convert, which means you can fatigue him for 1 forest aura, and he has the Trap trait, which ties him with his flipped effect, which states that he gains first strike when flipped face up during combat. If you're unfamiliar with traps in MetaZoo, cards that feature the Trap trait have the option to be played upside down for 0 aura cost. You only have to pay the aura cost when the card is flipped face up, so you can potentially get some free defenders. The catch is that they can only be flipped right side up if your opponent attacks the card directly, or attacks the card that you've placed the trap underneath. See, another benefit for traps is that they add a layer of protection to your beasties and artifacts if placed underneath them, because if your opponent attacks a page on top of them, they activate that trap instead. As a result, your opponent might be more hesitant to attack them in case whatever's underneath is more than their attacking beastie can handle. The problem with traps, though, is that once your opponent learns your deck, they know what traps to expect, and can figure out how to play around them, which is probably why we don't see them pop up too often in gameplay, but you never know, and it's a nice bonus to have. Especially in the case of Wood Devil, since he gains first strike when flipped, which means that unless your opponent is attacking using a beastie that also has first strike, Wood Devil gets to deal his attack first. Speaking of his attack, you definitely have to break this attack down because it's one of the reasons why Wood Devil is one of the strongest Sasquatch beasties, potentially in the entire game. His attack Devilish Scream can paralyze beasties, which keeps them from being able to attack, defend, or use their power until the end of the next turn. It deals 25 damage without Forest, and 50 damage with it, which is perfect for the attack's effect. The effect allows you to distribute the damage to any number of beasties, artifacts, or casters with a minimum of 5 damage dealt per target. This is another bonus that's similar to Skunk Ape and get around pesky traits like Flying and Spirit. Since Flying Beasties can only be targeted by Flying Beasties, and Spirits can't be targeted by attacks at all, what you want to do is target something without those traits with Wood Devil's attack. As long as you distribute at least 5 damage to that original target, you're free to distribute the remaining damage to all of those you normally wouldn't be able to touch. The reason why this works is because you're not declaring an attack targeting those beasties, just dealing damage. Pretty cool loophole, right? This guy with Power Up Red attached, which is a spell granting 100 life points and damage on attacks, is just absolutely insane, as he can essentially mow down an entire army in the right circumstances. Okay, now that we've covered all the little guys that make up this deck, it's time to move on to the main event that this build was inspired by, Bigfoot. Now, I'm going to be 100% honest with you guys, that this deck runs way, way better without either of the Bigfoots. Granted, they are good cards, and are great for if you just want to slam down a big beater that doesn't need other beasties to boost their attacks. However, in this kind of deck where you want to be able to play as many Sasquatch as possible, as quickly as possible, pulling one of these guys has very rarely come in handy due to their aura cost, and lack of really having a strong power / synergy that would make you pick one of them over one of the other Sasquatch I mentioned previously. If you're just playing this deck to have fun though, there's definitely no harm throwing them in there, and in my deck list and modifications portion of this video, I'll be sure to note which cards I swapped them out for when I took them out. Now with those disclaimers out of the way, let's start off with the OG version from Cryptid Nation, since I'm sure most of you are already familiar. This 4 aura 80 life point beastie features a Convert trait, which will make it easier for you to contract your other Sasquatch beasties, including Wilderness Bigfoot. He only has a slightly higher forest boost on his attacks compared to the other Sasquatches we mentioned earlier, but it's honestly more than enough considering the 50 base damage it deals. When Forest Terra is in play, he also gains a couple traits to give him some extra protection, like Invisibility, which keeps him from being targeted by attacks or blocked when attacking, and he also gains Magic Proof, which is a trait that keeps him from being targeted by spells. As for his power, King of the Apes, I haven't found myself using it too often, but I do like that it gives you the ability to awaken or fatigue another Sasquatch in the arena, which can come in handy if going up against a Sasquatch mirror match, or if you want to wake up one of your own Sasquatch you've already fatigued previously. For example, I could really see this pairing well with Wood Devil to deliver a couple sweet board wiping blows. Really, the main downside to Bigfoot is the fact that he doesn't share the tribal boost that all the other Sasquatch in this deck have. But that's okay, because the Wilderness version does come bearing it, along with a new attack and arena effect. Speaking of the Wilderness version, this Bigfoot is probably my favorite of the two when it comes to card mechanics and effects, even though it costs 1 more aura than the Cryptid Nation version at 5 Forest aura. It has the same 80 life points as the original, but as you can see, instead of the convert trait, this one features regen, which allows him to recover 10 life points at the end of every turn up to his max health. His Forest Terra boost is double the OG version's, which is very nice, especially considering his legendary strike attack deals a base damage of 50. Like Skunk Ape and Ohio Grassman, he has tribal boost to give himself and the rest of the Sasquatch squad a little backup on the battlefield. Speaking of backup, he doesn't just help out his fellow Sasquatch with attacking and defending. This guy can also bring more Sasquatch to the battlefield, as he makes the first Beasties Sasquatch you contract each turn 1 aura cheaper. Oh, and it doesn't say the cost can be reduced below 1, so feel free to throw this in a deck with cheap Sasquatches like the Napa Rebobs I mentioned earlier, and just feel free to go crazy. As an additional bonus that ties in with his cost-reducing ability, Bigfoot also comes bearing an alternate win condition, where if you manage to have 8 awakened Beastie Sasquatch in the game at any time, you automatically win the game, regardless of your life point total. Now, before you get too excited, I can almost guarantee that you won't be able to pull off that kind of win condition with this deck, just given the number of Beasties and their aura cost, but you definitely have a chance with Napa Rebobs. And hey, if you happen to prove me wrong, definitely feel free to let me know and tag me in a photo of your results on Instagram. Now, before we finish off this deck tech Sunday, we have to add toppings in the way of spells and potions. I love the Beasties in this deck, but they will definitely need some help to get things moving due to their lack of traits. See, none of them have Fleet, which would allow them to automatically attack or use their power the moment they hit the battlefield. And even though they have Ohio Grassman for protection, they unfortunately fall victim to that setback I just mentioned. So while we wait on those guys to get warmed up, they're going to need some extra defense themselves since they also lack built-in protection like flying and spirit traits. It's important that you become familiar with when to play some of these spells and potions and which beasties you want to save them for, but eventually all that will become second nature as you play more and become more comfortable with this deck. And of course, I'll include my own tips at the end of the video. Starting off with the basics, we're going to be including 2 of the 3 essential MetaZoo spells, 2 anniversary promos to take out traits on problem beasties, and a New Year's New Beginnings when you need to refresh your hand while also devastating your opponents. I thought about switching out New Year's New Beginnings for New Beginnings, since the former can be pretty destructive to yourself. However, since this deck uses multiple copies of your major staples, you can most likely afford to lose whatever's in your hand. The anniversary promos are probably one of the most important spells in this deck, especially when going up against builds that use beasties with flying or spirit traits. This is because most of your removal is going to be in the form of your beasties attacking, and they won't be able to deal damage to those beasties since those traits prevent them from being targeted by attacks. First Anniversary removes the protection, and since your beasties don't have any traits to worry about, well, aside from Bigfoot, but that's irrelevant, it doesn't cause any detriment to your board state. Normally, I would next add a couple bookmarks, which are the basic universal card drawing spell, but in this case, Forest actually has its own card drawing spells that are not only more powerful, but also synergize better with the deck. For example, we have the new spell card fresh out of Wilderness called Germinate, which is a 1 aura cost spell that lets you draw a card while also reducing the cost of your next beastie featuring a Forest Terra bonus. The spell will not only draw you a card, but also make it easier to contract Skunk Ape, Bigfoot, and basically every other Sasquatch in the deck. Germinate is one of my favorite new Wilderness spells that I can definitely see popping up in more decks, just because so many beasties in MetaZoo benefit from the Forest Terra, and with every set we get more and more artifacts and pages that make splashing cards like this one a piece of cake. I do want to add a note of caution though when playing this card, and that is that because of the wording, you must make sure that the very next page you contract is the card you want to reduce the aura cost for, otherwise the effect will be negated. The last card drawing spell we'll be including is another one of the most powerful card drawing spells in MetaZoo, Growth. For just 2 aura, this spell allows you to draw 5 cards with no other stipulations attached. And in this build, you don't even need to bring along another plant with you because the bonsai tree you bring for Wood Devil can double as a plant for growth as well. Our next card is one I've debated on whether or not I want to switch out, so I would definitely love to hear your guys' thoughts below. Power Up Red versus including 2 copies of Boost Aura. Power Up Red is a 3 aura cost neutral spell that gives the beastie it's attached to 100 plus bonus on their attacks and life points. Boost Aura is a 1 aura cost neutral artifact that boosts the attacks of all your beasties on the field by 5 times the amount of aura you're able to pay for it. Originally, I started off just using Power Up Red because of the fact that 99% of the beasties in this deck have their own built-in attack/life point boost already. So I just felt that Boost Aura wasn't really necessary, whereas Power Up Red came in handy when I really needed that extra punch. Almost like having access to a cheaper, more powerful Bigfoot, and there's definitely no denying the power level of having a Power Up Red Wood Devil, especially against go-wide decks. However, the more I tested this deck, the more I found myself able to have at least 3 beasties in play. There's plenty of extra aura to spare that would be perfect for a boost aura to drop down and deliver a killing blow that's not dependent on one beastie. See, oftentimes when you drop a Power Up Red on a beastie, that's basically automatically dropping a bright red target on the field that your opponent will want to take out. But with Boost Aura spreading out the attack damage, it makes a more challenging situation for your opponent to take care of because the problem isn't concentrated on just one beastie. Boost Aura does have the downside of only having 25 life points, but because you have the ability to automatically activate it, which is a small sacrifice of your own life points, you can make your finishing blow before your opponent has a chance to deal their own damage to your artifact. I also like the fact that Boost Aura costs 1/3 of the contraction cost as Power Up Red, which means that it can be summoned earlier in the game, and you can have up to 2 of them in your deck instead of the 1-page limit for Power Up Red. This means that if you have to toss one for a New Year's New Beginnings, you know that you'll be able to have access to another one later on in the game. And now we've come to the last section of the deck breakdown portion of this video, potions. This deck only uses 2 potions that I'm sure most of you are probably familiar with even if you just started playing MetaZoo, Lightning in a Bottle and Smoky Spirits. Lightning in a Bottle is a lightning potion that could arguably be one of the essentials in MetaZoo, as it costs 0 aura to contract and awakens any beastie, allowing it to attack or use its power, even if it normally wouldn't be able to. It also grants the trait First Strike, which allows a beastie to attack first, even if it's a defender. Bear in mind, though, that if both the attacking and defending beasties have First Strike, a coin toss will determine who makes the first blow. This card is especially crucial to this deck, as none of the beasties have the Fleet trait we discussed earlier, which would let them attack or use their power when they hit the battlefield. Lightning in a Bottle gives them that extra kick, or I guess I should say jolt, to get things going, which I'll go into more detail about in the tips portion coming up. The next potion, Smoky Spirits, almost does the opposite of Lightning in a Bottle, as instead of helping beasties attack, it stops them from attacking altogether. It can be played anytime a beastie declares an attack. This is extremely powerful, since you don't have to contract it on your turn, and because it costs 0 aura, you can easily safely use up all of your aura when it's your turn while holding onto one of these in your hand. Referring back to what I was saying earlier, there are certain times for when you want to play these, so let's go ahead and hop into the tips portion of this video. Early in the game, one of the best moves you can do is use Lightning in a Bottle and your Ohio Grassman to create a nest token, especially if you have access to 2 bottles, allowing you to make more than 1 token during your turn. Even though it might immediately get taken out on your opponent's turn, or cause your opponent to go after your life points instead, the point is that you want your Sasquatch to be left alone so that you can play more on the field, building up that tribal boost as much as possible. Think of it like providing a distraction to keep your opponent busy, while also wearing down their resources. Another excellent early game combo is using Lightning in a Bottle on Wood Devil, especially when going up against token decks, decks using lots of small beasties, or decks depending on their traits for protection, like Lightning is known for. Wood Devil can take out multiple tokens with its attack before things get too out of control, and ping down many of the beasties of MetaZoo that would normally be out of reach. I especially enjoyed using him to take out Radioactive Hornets, which is a very popular turn 1 lightning beastie from Wilderness that I'll actually be covering in a future video. Lastly, another early game play you want to make with Lightning in a Bottle is if your opponent has an aura factor on the field that you can take out with one of the beasties I just mentioned. Now, this strategy isn't really unique to this deck. I mainly just wanted to note it in this case because of what I mentioned earlier as early game strategies. If your opponent has an aura factor on the field, especially in their first turn, and you have the opportunity to take it out, I would highly prioritize that over pumping out nest tokens and thinning down their army. With Smoky Spirits, this is one where you'll have to determine when to use it based on how the game is going. However, I wanted to add that you mainly want to use these to protect your beasties and artifacts, not your life points. You have 1,000 life points, while your poor pages only have, 25, unless they're Lucky Wood Devil who has 75. It's much more important that you protect them over yourself because you have a very limited number of artifacts, and having as many Sasquatch as possible on the field is key to your win condition. Okay, so now that we've broken down the deck essentials and gameplay tips, I want to take a moment to cover some honorable mentions that I tested but eventually took out, some of which were included with the Paul Bunyan theme deck. For starters, the theme deck comes with a spell card called Hiding in Thickets, which is a low-cost spell that can protect all beasties with the Forest Terra boost from being targeted by attacks. Now, this card does synergize well with this deck, considering the fact that every beastie in it has the Forest Terra boost. However, I ran into a couple issues with this card. For starters, because we're playing multiple Ohio Grassmen who can create a wall of nest tokens that already protect your entire Sasquatch squad, it just felt like this extra protection was overkill. Especially when you can be using those 2 aura to cast another Sasquatch like, Ohio Grassman, who, unlike hiding in thickets, remains on the battlefield and is able to repeatedly create protection while also having the ability to attack. If you were able to create some kind of, surprise combat trick by being able to contract the spell in your opponent's turn, like, with Smoky Spirits, then I could see a reason to keep this card in the deck. However, since it's limited to only being contracted on your turn, and it's not an artifact that remains on the field, I couldn't really find much of a reason to justify its inclusion. Another spell card I removed from the theme deck is Restricting Roots, which is a 2 aura cost spell that prevents an opposing beastie from awakening during its next turn. If it's a water beastie, that beastie also loses its traits, effects, and terra bonuses during its next turn. This is a card I went further into detail on in my previous video breaking down the top forest pages in Wilderness. Not because I think it's one of the top cards, but because it was also included as an honorable mention, just like in this video. I like that it stops a beastie from awakening, which not only prevents it from attacking, but also using its powers. However, if including this card solely for that ability, you're just better off going with Catnap, which delivers a similar effect for half the cost. There is a use case though where you'll definitely want to include it, which is why I would recommend at least having a few of these in your side deck, and that's for if you're going up against a water deck, especially when playing Wallowa Lake Crustacean. This is because of the lower portion of the card, which is meant to essentially render water beasties like the crab practically defenseless and making them much easier to take out. If you're not taking on water, however, I would instead leave this in your side deck as we have enough protection already from Skunk Ape, Ohio Grassman, and Smoky Spirits. Another card I removed from the theme deck was actually a beastie. Our poor friend, the Billywhack Monster. While he does have the same aura cost and forest terror boost all the other Sasquatches have, I just felt that his power, which only boosts one beastie Sasquatch at a time, wasn't strong enough when compared with the other powers we covered previously. Whenever I played him, I felt like he was out there, doing things and stuff, but eventually I decided to swap them all out for Ohio Grassmen because they just have far stronger abilities that benefit the deck as a whole. The last card from the theme deck that I also tested but wound up taking out later was Magallan Monster. Now, this was actually a beastie I was pretty excited about including because I liked that he had Convert, which originally I thought would make it easier to contract other Sasquatches in the game. However, I kept running into a scenario where, because of his aura cost, you have to play him during your second turn at minimum, which actually wound up being a bigger setback than it seems. This is because, unless you're lucky enough to also already have an Aurafact in play from your first turn, you're basically using up all of your aura to contract Magallan Monster. Again, doesn't seem like much of a big deal until you realize that even if you have Lightning in a bottle handy to be able to activate his Convert trait the turn you play him, he only gives you one forest aura for your disposal, which won't be enough to contract any of your beasties. I do like that you can use this to play your spells and artifacts, but without Lightning in a bottle, he just felt too slow, and I wound up replacing him also with Ohio Grassman, which again just offers a much stronger ability. The last honorable mention I'll be getting into is a Sasquatch from Nightfall, Momo! This poofy purple fella is a 3 aura beastie that will only cost you 2 aura if there's an orange pumpkin within eyesight, so if you do include him, make sure you bring along a pocket jack-o'-lantern. I liked that he has 60 life points, which is more than almost every Sasquatch in this deck, and considering that he shares the same aura cost and forest terra bonus, he seemed almost like the perfect addition, especially when first reading his attack. His Stinky Punch attack has a pretty sweet effect, which reads that if you roll a die and the result is a 1 or a 6, you place an opposing beastie in combat on top of its owner's spellbook. It's a nice little combat trick that will help slow down your opponent as it will force them to keep bookmarking and recontracting the same beastie, if you're lucky. The problem that I found with this effect is that unlike with the coin toss, where the chances are an even 50-50, the odds are actually stacked against you, and that you only have a third of a chance at bouncing your opponent's beastie, which means that more often than not, you're just dealing 45 damage, which, don't get me wrong, is still good, but just not as great as it could have been if the effect depended on, a coin toss, or at least a die roll with a 50-50 possibility. Like in the case of Bigfoot, Momo also unfortunately suffers from not having the tribal boost the majority of the Sasquatches in this deck does, so I just felt better off including another Skunk Ape, or, once again, Ohio Grassman. And that concludes the deck. If you guys have any questions, or you have any thoughts or opinions on how I can make some improvements, feel free to let me know either in the comment below, or feel free to hit me up on Instagram. I'll be sure to post a link to that in the description, or also I'll probably post, a sticker up here on screen as well, just to make it easy for you guys. And like I was saying in the beginning of the video, if you're interested in picking up any of the cards that I covered today, or cards from basically like any trading card game out there, I am sponsored through Channel Fireball. All you have to do is enter my promo code GHOSTBEAR at checkout. There's no extra cost to you. I basically just receive a small percentage of the sale. And speaking of Channel Fireball, also like I was saying in the beginning of the video, if you're interested in reading of the articles I published through them, going over MetaZoo cards, combos, all of that good stuff, I'll be sure to post a link to that in the description as well. In my next video, I'm going to be continuing my series where I break down each of the different types of wilderness and which cards I think have potential. My next video is going to be covering Lightning, which I'm super excited about because Lightning got quite some crazy updates in this set that I think you guys are definitely going to want to stick around and hear about. And after that video, or videos depending on how many cards I end up covering, I'm of course going to follow it up with a deck tech combining all the cards that I cover, so also stick around after that video if you would like to see that. As always, I really appreciate all the subs, comments, likes, follows on Instagram, all of that stuff. I really appreciate it. I really hope that you guys have a good one, and I will see you all in my next video. Take care.